They say revenge is best served cold, but in Austin's tech sector, it is best served wrapped in an unbreachable software licensing agreement. When my boss publicly executed my career in front of 30 millionaires to steal 2 years of my work, he thought he was burying a silent, compliant engineer. He did not realize his arrogant rush for glory had just triggered the digital death warrant for his entire corporate existence. Hello to the amazing audience of Boss Revenge Stories. We want to take a quick moment to thank you for your incredible support because recently, YouTube disabled our channel's monetization features, leaving us with zero budget to keep the lights on. If you find today's story entertaining and satisfying, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our hardworking team can cover their living expenses and continue bringing these satisfying revenge stories to life. You can support the channel by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description and the pinned comment below. My name is Aspen Roberts. For 3 years, I was the unseen spine of AuraGrid Innovations, a rapidly growing green energy tech startup based in Austin, Texas. We were supposed to be revolutionizing urban power grids, but like most startups, we were mostly just burning through venture capital and pretending we knew what we were doing. I am a senior software engineer. I prefer the quiet hum of servers and the elegant logic of clean code over the loud, ego-driven chaos of the corporate open-plan office. I kept my head down, wrote the algorithms that kept the company afloat, and expected my hard work to speak for itself. That was my first mistake. Hard work does not speak for itself when there is someone louder standing right in front of it holding a microphone. That someone was Vance Sterling. Vance was our project manager. He was the kind of guy who wore bespoke suits to a casual Friday tech office, possessed blindingly white teeth, and spoke entirely in empty corporate buzzwords. He loved talking about synergizing our bandwidth, shifting the paradigm, and leveraging blockchain-adjacent architectures. It was all absolute nonsense. The man did not know the difference between a Python script and a dead snake, but he had a terrifying talent for failing upward. He was a charismatic parasite. The theft of my intellectual property started small, almost casually, every Tuesday. I would compile a highly technical, 20-page grid optimization report. By Thursday morning, Vance would be standing in front of the executive board, presenting my exact findings as his own visionary strategy. I was doing a deep dive into the analytics over the weekend, he would say, flashing that predatory smile, and I realized we need to rethink our load balancing. It made my blood boil. I did the deep dive. He just read my executive summary while drinking his $9 artisanal matcha latte. Soon, it became blatant. He started physically erasing my name from the title slides of major pitch decks. When I finally cornered him in the break room and politely asked why my name was omitted from the presentation I built, he placed a patronizing hand on my shoulder. "Aspen," he said in a hushed, fatherly tone. "We are a cohesive unit. Leadership wants to see a unified front from management. The credit belongs to the team." In his twisted dictionary, the team meant Vance Sterling, and only Vance Sterling. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. We were exactly 4 weeks away from deploying our flagship software for our biggest client, a launch that would secure our Series C funding and trigger massive performance bonuses. I was doing routine maintenance on a shared administrative server when I stumbled upon an unsecured, cached email directory. It was a catastrophic security failure on the IT department's end, but it was a revelation for me. I opened a thread between Vance and the head of human resources titled Post-Launch Restructuring Protocol. My eyes scanned the screen, and my stomach plummeted. Vance had drafted a meticulous, step-by-step plan to terminate my employment exactly 48 hours after our deployment went live. His written justification was that my role would become redundant once the heavy lifting was done, allowing the company to streamline their operational budget. But the true motive was buried in the final paragraph. By firing me just days before the end of the fiscal quarter, my promised performance bonus, a sum large enough to pay off 100% of my student loans, would be absorbed back into the departmental pool. Vance had explicitly requested that the surplus budget be reallocated into his own executive compensation package as a reward for bringing the project in under budget. He was going to sacrifice my career, steal my money, and use it to buy himself a new sports car. A normal person would have snapped. They would have printed the emails, marched into the executive suite, and caused a screaming match that would require building security to escort them out. I did not cry. I did not panic. I sat completely still in my ergonomic chair, staring at the glowing monitor, and I smiled. It was a terrifying, quiet smile. It was the smile of an architect who realizes the man trying to lock her out of the building is standing precisely where she placed the demolition charges. I quietly closed the email tab, scrubbed my access logs so no one would ever know I had been there, and went right back to typing my code. I decided right then and there that I was not going to throw a tantrum. I was going to throw a legal grenade. If Vance wanted to steal my life's work, I was going to let him take it, right up until the moment it exploded in his hands. The first step in executing a flawless retaliation is establishing an airtight, legally impenetrable alibi. In the corporate ecosystem, an alibi is not a physical location. It is a piece of paper that legally insulates you from the blast radius of your own actions. I did not need a getaway driver. I needed a corporate shell, the very next weekend. While my boss was likely playing golf and dreaming about his stolen bonus, I plunged into the meticulous process of anonymous business registration. By Monday morning, I had wired $350 to a specialized, third-party registered agent located in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I chose Wyoming specifically for its notoriously strict corporate secrecy laws, which rival those of offshore tax havens. Through this agent, I filed the articles of organization to create a brand new, perfectly legal entity named Silverleaf Analytics Limited Liability Company. Because I utilized a proxy service, my actual name appeared absolutely nowhere on the public state registry or the incorporation documents. If Vance, the executive board, or even a team of highly paid corporate lawyers tried to look up the ownership of the company, the trail would instantly run cold at the front door of a nondescript strip mall halfway across the country. On paper, I was a ghost. With my phantom company established, I needed to arm it with the ultimate weapon. The entire green energy grid project, the flagship product that was supposed to secure tens of millions of dollars in venture capital for the firm, relied entirely on a highly complex predictive modeling system I had developed from scratch. I called it the Echo Load algorithm. It was the digital brain of the entire operation, capable of predicting massive power fluctuations and rerouting energy microseconds before a grid failure could occur. And here's the beautiful, legally undeniable truth about the Echo Load algorithm: my employer did not own a single line of it. Standard employment contracts universally stipulate that any intellectual property you create on company time, or using company equipment, automatically belongs to the employer. I knew this rule intimately, so I had operated with the extreme caution of a forensic cleaner. I wrote every single character of the Echo Load source code strictly between the hours of 10 o'clock at night and 4 o'clock in the morning. I sat at my own kitchen table, typing on a personal laptop I had purchased with my own cash, connected exclusively to my own private home internet network. I never used a company server to compile it, and I never let a single snippet of the core logic touch a company hard drive. I maintained meticulously time-stamped personal cloud backups, network activity logs, and hardware MAC addresses to prove beyond a shadow of a legal doubt that the technology was developed entirely independently of my employment. Acting in my capacity as the sole anonymous proprietor, I legally transferred the proprietary rights of the algorithm to my new shell company. I then filed for a formal commercial copyright on the architecture under the name of Silverleaf Analytics. Within exactly 21 days, I received the federal registration certificate. The code was no longer just a brilliant idea. It was heavily protected, untouchable private commercial property. The startup was about to build its entire corporate empire on a foundation they had absolutely no legal right to use. The next critical phase was the technical integration. I had to weave my privately owned algorithm into the company's overarching software framework without triggering any internal security alarms. To accomplish this, I designed a highly sophisticated application programming interface, essentially a hidden digital gateway. Think of this gateway like an heavily fortified toll booth, positioned on the only highway leading into a major city. I embedded this checkpoint deep within the core infrastructure of our project repository. I hard-coded the system so that every single data packet, every predictive simulation, and every operational command from the company's interface had to route directly through my specific gateway to function. If the company's software could not communicate with my toll booth, the entire system would instantly paralyze, becoming nothing more than millions of lines of useless, dead text. Because Vance was perpetually preoccupied with managing his image and practicing his hollow elevator pitches, he never once requested a genuine code audit. When I submitted the architectural updates, he blindly clicked approve without reading a single line of the technical documentation. He assumed I was just completing my assigned engineering tasks. He had absolutely no idea that I was quietly changing the locks on the doors of his own project and pocketing the only key. However, a lock is entirely useless without a reliable trigger. I needed an automated mechanism that would execute my retaliation flawlessly, even if I was physically removed from the premises. I required a digital dead man's switch. Late one evening, I wrote a tiny, virtually undetectable script and attached it directly to the back-end server hosting the gateway. This script was elegantly simple and had exactly one operational directive: every 60 seconds, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It would quietly send a query to the company's internal human resources directory. It was searching for one highly specific data point: the active employment status of my specific personnel ID. As long as the human resources server returned a status of active employee, the script would remain dormant, and the gateway would allow the echoload algorithm to process the company's data seamlessly, making Vance look like an absolute genius. But I programmed a fatal, irreversible condition into the logic loop. If that automated query ever returned a status of terminated, suspended, or account deactivated, the dead man's switch would instantly trigger. Within milliseconds of detecting my termination, the script was designed to execute a localized cryptographic lockdown. It would instantly scramble the access tokens to the gateway, effectively dropping a blast door over the predictive algorithm. I was extremely careful not to design the script to delete or destroy any company data, as that would constitute a federal cybercrime. Instead, I simply designed it to legally revoke their access to my privately owned intellectual property the exact second they decided I was no longer on their payroll. I was going to let Vance build his towering house of cards as high as he possibly could, and then I was going to set a timer on the foundation. The atmosphere inside the office during those final weeks was suffocating. We were on the precipice of finalizing a $45 million municipal contract with Meridian City Power. This was not just another client. They were the apex predator of the regional energy sector. Securing their grid management system meant our startup would transition from a scrappy venture capital experiment into a major corporate player. If this deployment failed, the company would bleed out its remaining operational runway in less than 6 months. The stakes were absolute, which made it the perfect environment to plant a bomb. The technical lockdown I had coded was only half of the trap. A dead man's switch is useless if the company can simply sue you into oblivion for deploying it. I needed an ironclad, legally binding agreement that explicitly granted me permission to hold their system hostage. I needed Vance Sterling to willingly hand me the detonator. I spent 4 grueling nights studying corporate contract law, parsing through the mind-numbing syntax of software licensing agreements. I had to craft a document so exceptionally boring, so dense with administrative jargon, that the human brain would instinctively reject reading it. I generated a 90-page technical manifesto and titled it Internal Software Compliance Standards Update. The first 67 pages were a labyrinth of irrelevant system architecture diagrams, data retention protocols, and meaningless open-source compliance guidelines. It was the visual equivalent of sleeping pills. But buried deep within the text, precisely on page 68, section 4, paragraph B, I inserted the poison pill. The clause was written in dense, suffocating legalese, but its meaning was brutally clear. It stated that all core algorithmic functions related to predictive load balancing were the exclusive, copyrighted intellectual property of Silverleaf Analytics Limited Liability Company. Furthermore, it stipulated that AuraGrid Innovations acknowledged they held no ownership over this property, and that their right to utilize, commercialize, or deploy the software was strictly contingent upon the continuous, unrevoked permission of the intellectual property owner. It explicitly waived the company's right to pursue damages in the event that this permission was revoked. If Vance signed this document, he was legally admitting that the company did not own the brain of their own flagship product, and he was immunizing me from any civil liability when I inevitably shut it down. The execution of this phase required precise timing. In the corporate world, there is a specific window of time known as the Friday afternoon dead zone. It occurs exactly at 4:45 on a Friday, 15 minutes before the weekend officially begins. At this exact moment, an executive's cognitive defenses are entirely non-existent. Their mind is already at the golf course, the bar, or the airport. They will blindly agree to almost anything if it clears their inbox and allows them to leave the building. At exactly 4:47 on Friday afternoon, I attached the 90-page document to an email and sent it to Vance. I flagged it with high importance. The subject line read, "Action required routine compliance sign-off for Meridian deployment." In the body of the email, I kept it brief and professionally mundane. I wrote, "Vance, the IT department requires a standard management signature on the updated internal compliance protocols before we can migrate the final server patches this weekend. Please apply your digital signature so I can finalize the deployment checklist." I had installed a hidden tracking pixel within the document, linked to a digital signature platform. I sat at my desk, staring at my monitor, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The tension was agonizing. If he forwarded the document to the legal department for review, my entire plan would disintegrate. If he actually decided to read it, I would be fired immediately, and they would seize my servers before the legal protections could hold up in court. I watched the live tracking dashboard. At 4:51, the dashboard updated. Document opened by Vance Sterling. I held my breath, counting the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4. At 4:51 and 4 seconds, a bright green notification flashed across my screen. Document digitally signed by Vance Sterling. I let out a slow, trembling breath. He did exactly what I knew he would do. Faced with a 90-page document standing between him and his weekend, his arrogance and his profound laziness won. He did not read a single word. He did not consult the legal team. He just scrolled straight to the bottom, clicked the signature field, and blindly authorized the digital death warrant for his own career. I immediately downloaded the finalized, legally binding document. I exported the complete metadata, securing the precise timestamps, the IP address from which it was signed, and the cryptographic hash of his digital certificate. I sent triplicate copies to my secure offshore servers and printed a physical hard copy, which I locked inside my fireproof safe at home. The trap was set, locked, and legally weaponized. Over the course of the next 3 days, I began the quiet process of erasing my physical presence from the office. I moved with the slow, deliberate care of a ghost. On Monday morning, I took my expensive mechanical keyboard home, replacing it with a generic company-issued one. On Tuesday, my framed degrees and personal reference books silently vanished from my cubicle shelves. By Wednesday afternoon, my desk was entirely sterile, stripped of any personality or identifying markers. I left only a company mug and a few scattered pens to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Nobody noticed. They were all too busy panicking over the Meridian City Power presentation. Vance was strutting around the office in a new custom-tailored suit, rehearsing his empty speeches, completely oblivious to the fact that the floor beneath him had already been entirely removed. The morning of the presentation arrived with the sterile, artificial chill typical of high-rise corporate architecture. We were gathered in the executive boardroom, a massive glass enclosure suspended on the 42nd floor, overlooking the sprawling Austin skyline. The room smelled of freshly brewed artisanal coffee, expensive leather seating, and the sharp, unmistakable metallic tang of corporate anxiety. Every chair at the custom-built mahogany table was occupied. The venture capital investors sat with their arms crossed, their faces unreadable masks of calculated interest. Opposite them sat the delegation from Meridian City Power, a group of stern, pragmatic utility officials who controlled a budget of hundreds of millions of dollars. Clustered near the front was the entire senior executive leadership of Oragrid Innovations, sweating through their designer suits. The air in the room was so thick with tension it felt physically heavy. I stood at the presenter's podium, bathed in the cool light of the massive digital projector screen. For 25 minutes, I had been guiding the room through the complex integration metrics of our system. My voice was steady, professional, and entirely detached. I broke down the latency benchmarks, the failover redundancies, and the real-time data processing capacities with surgical precision. The Meridian City officials were nodding in approval. I could see the venture capitalists relaxing their shoulders. The presentation was going flawlessly. I had just clicked to slide number 32, a detailed graph illustrating the predictive load balancing, and opened my mouth to explain the peak efficiency algorithms. "Thank you. That will be more than enough from you." The voice cut through the air like a gunshot. I froze. The entire room collectively stopped breathing. Vance Sterling rose from his prime leather chair at the head of the table. He was wearing a brand-new, charcoal gray, three-piece suit that probably cost more than my first car. He slowly walked toward the front of the room, positioning himself directly between me and the investors, deliberately blocking their view of me. A predatory, meticulously rehearsed smile stretched across his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vance announced, his voice dripping with forced charm and practiced authority, "I want to personally thank our junior engineering staff for their assistance in getting the groundwork laid for this deployment. However, as Oragrid Innovations transitions from a developmental phase into a massive, enterprise-level operational scale, we must make necessary strategic adjustments to our senior personnel." He turned to face me. The smile remained, but his eyes were entirely dead. He was not just taking the steering wheel, he was throwing me out of the moving vehicle so everyone could watch. "Effective immediately, your employment with Oragrid Innovations is terminated," Vance said, projecting his voice so it echoed against the glass walls. "We are restructuring the technical division to align with our new operational magnitude. Human Resources has already processed your severance and deactivated your corporate credentials. Building security is waiting by the elevators to escort you off the premises. You are dismissed." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a suffocating, heavy vacuum. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vents and the distant, muffled sound of traffic 42 stories below. Around the mahogany table, the executives shifted uncomfortably. A few of the Meridian City officials exchanged alarmed, confused glances. Terminating a key engineer in the exact middle of a multi-million-dollar client pitch was a display of aggressive dominance bordering on corporate psychopathy. Vance was trying to show the clients that he was a ruthless, decisive visionary who controlled every aspect of his domain. Everyone in the room braced themselves for the inevitable explosion. They expected the natural human reaction to such a profound, humiliating betrayal. They expected me to drop my notes. They expected my face to flush bright red. They waited for the tears of a broken employee or the screaming, desperate rage of a woman having her entire career publicly stolen. Vance stood there, his chest puffed out, physically bracing himself for my retaliation, ready to play the calm, collected manager dealing with a hysterical subordinate. I gave him absolutely nothing. I looked at Vance, then let my eyes sweep slowly across the room, meeting the gaze of every single terrified executive and bewildered investor. I did not blink. I did not frown. I simply allowed a very small, utterly serene smile to touch the corners of my mouth, the kind of smile you give a child who is proudly showing off a tower of blocks built directly on top of a busy railroad track. I reached down and gently placed the wireless slide clicker onto the polished wooden podium. The small plastic click echoed loudly in the silent room. "I understand completely," I said. My voice was smooth, quiet, and chillingly steady. I looked directly into Vance's eyes. "I wish you all a highly successful launch." Without another word, I stepped down from the podium. I did not rush. I did not look back. I maintained a posture of absolute, unshakable poise as I walked the entire length of the boardroom. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the hallway, leaving the silence behind me. I did not wait for the security guards. I took the elevator down to the lobby, walked through the revolving doors, and stepped out into the blazing Austin sunlight. I crossed the busy avenue and walked straight into a quiet, dimly lit coffee shop directly opposite the Auragrid office tower. I walked up to the counter and calmly ordered a double shot of espresso. I paid in cash, took my small ceramic cup, and found a secluded table by the window that offered a perfect, unobstructed view of my former employer's building. I opened my personal laptop. I connected to the secure, encrypted mobile network I had set up earlier. I opened a terminal window and entered my private monitoring dashboard. The screen filled with lines of scrolling green text, indicating the live data streams of the Auragrid servers. My heartbeat was completely steady now. I took a slow sip of my bitter espresso and watched the screen, waiting for the Human Resources database update to sync with the main network. Back inside the boardroom, Vance Sterling took his place at the podium like a conquering king returning from battle. He smoothed the lapels of his custom suit, flashed his blindingly white teeth, and leaned into the microphone. "Now that we have cleared the unnecessary technical clutter from the room," Vance said smoothly, "I want to personally guide you through the actual execution phase. What you are about to see is the live activation of our proprietary load balancing architecture, handling a simulated capacity of 2 million households." He pressed the heavy activation button on the console. Deep within the server racks, a line of code sparked to life. The main system sent its routine handshake request toward the API gateway. It needed the core algorithm to process the simulation. The gateway caught the request. Following its program directive, the gateway sent a microsecond query to the Human Resources server. The Human Resources server, having processed Vance's direct order just 10 minutes prior, fired back the response: "Status account deactivated. Employment terminated." The condition was met. The dead man's switch tripped. Inside the boardroom, Vance was gesturing expansively toward the massive projector screen. Notice how seamlessly the system anticipates the surge in demand. He never finished the sentence. The beautiful, calming blue simulation graphics instantly vanished. The enormous 40-foot projector screen strobed once, then flooded the dimly lit room with a blinding, aggressive neon red. A massive, capitalized wall of text locked onto the display. "Critical system failure. Severe copyright infringement detected. All access to proprietary source code has been revoked by the intellectual property owner, Silverleaf Analytics Limited Liability Company. Unauthorized commercial deployment halted." Vance stopped mid-gesture. His mouth hung open. "Just a minor display glitch," he stammered, his confident voice suddenly cracking. He aggressively slammed his finger onto the wireless clicker. Nothing happened. He slammed it again, then threw the clicker down and lunged for the keyboard on the podium. He mashed the escape key. He typed rapid override commands. The red screen did not flinch. The entire simulated power grid was completely frozen, locked behind a cryptographic wall of unbreakable code. Chaos erupted instantly. The head of the Meridian City Power delegation slammed his hands onto the mahogany table and stood up. "What kind of joke is this?" he demanded, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "Are you trying to run a municipal grid on stolen software?" At the far end of the table, the chief legal officer of Auragrid Innovations was already tearing into his laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he frantically searched the company's internal registry for the name flashing on the screen. He typed in Silverleaf Analytics. The search returned exactly one hit. It was a 90-page compliance document filed late last Friday afternoon. The lawyer opened the file. His eyes scanned the text, searching for the catch. He found page 68. He read section 4, paragraph B. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. He scrolled to the very bottom of the document and saw the cryptographic hash of a digital signature. "Vance," the lawyer whispered. His voice was trembling so violently that the entire room went dead silent to hear it. The lawyer stood up, knocking his heavy leather chair over backward. "Vance, what did you sign last Friday?" "I do not know," Vance shouted back, his composure entirely shattered. "Just some routine update from engineering. It was standard technical paperwork." "You signed away the company," the lawyer screamed, losing all professional decorum. "You signed a legally binding waiver acknowledging we do not own a single line of the core algorithm. You explicitly authorized this third-party company to shut us down, and you waived our right to sue them. We have zero legal recourse, none at all." The boardroom exploded into absolute pandemonium. The venture capitalists began shouting at the chief executive officer, demanding an immediate explanation for how $45 million in funding was resting on an unverified, stolen algorithm. One investor pulled out his phone, threatening to freeze the company's operational accounts before the end of the hour. The lead official from Meridian City Power grabbed his briefcase and pointed a shaking finger directly at the executive team. "This meeting is over," the official roared over the noise. "Meridian City is pulling the contract immediately. Expect a call from the district attorney by this afternoon. We will be pursuing federal fraud charges against every single one of you." The chief executive officer buried his face in his hands, realizing his entire startup was practically bankrupt within a span of 3 minutes. He looked up, his eyes locking onto the man standing at the front of the room. At the podium, Vance Sterling was paralyzed. The arrogant, fast-talking manager was entirely gone. His bespoke suit was suddenly suffocating him. Sweat poured down his forehead, stinging his eyes and soaking into his crisp white collar. He stared at the glowing red screen, the words burning into his retinas. He could hear the screams of the investors, the threats of the city officials, and the furious curses of his own legal team, but he could not move a single muscle. He finally understood. I had not just handed him the keys to his own undoing. I had built the cage, secured the locks, and asked him to kindly step inside, and he had done it eagerly. I was on my third sip of espresso when my cell phone vibrated violently against the cafe table. The caller ID displayed the name of the chief executive officer of Oragrid Innovations. I let the phone ring 4 times, letting him sweat, before I casually swiped the screen to answer. Aspen. His voice was breathless and frantic, stripped of every single ounce of his usual polished executive authority. "Aspen, where are you?" "We have a catastrophic situation in the boardroom. The entire system is locked. The Meridian City officials are threatening to walk out and call the district attorney. Vance is absolutely useless. He is just standing here sweating and panicking. You have to come back upstairs right now and fix this." I took a slow breath, enjoying the rich aroma of my coffee, and replied, "I am not an employee of Oragrid. Remember, I was terminated exactly 34 minutes ago." "Forget the termination," the chief executive officer begged, his voice cracking under the immense pressure of a $45 million failure. "I am officially overriding Vance. Please, whatever you want, whatever it takes. Just come back and unlock the grid before we lose everything." I told him I would consider his request and ended the call. I did not rush. I sat there for another 45 minutes, finishing my espresso, watching the frantic shadows of executives pacing behind the tinted glass windows 42 stories above me. Let them bleed. Let them feel the full weight of the disaster Vance had engineered. When I finally decided they had suffered enough, I walked back across the avenue and entered the lobby. The security guards who had been instructed to escort me out of the building just an hour earlier now rushed to hold the VIP elevator doors open for me. I stepped onto the 42nd floor. The boardroom looked like a corporate war zone. Ties were pulled loose, designer jackets were thrown over chairs, and the air was thick with the smell of nervous sweat. The Meridian City officials were angrily packing their briefcases. In the corner, Vance Sterling was slumped in a chair, looking like a deflated, hollow shell of a man. His face was gray, and his hands were shaking uncontrollably. When I pushed the heavy glass doors open, the entire room fell dead silent. I strolled in slowly, holding my half-empty paper coffee cup. I completely ignored Vance's pathetic, pleading eyes as they tracked my every movement. I did not go to the presenter's podium. Instead, I walked directly to the head of the mahogany table, the absolute center of power in the room. I placed my coffee down, opened my personal laptop, and plugged in the main display cable. The glaring red warning message on the massive projector screen instantly vanished, replaced by a crisp, high-resolution document. It was the Federal Copyright Registration Certificate for the Echoload algorithm, registered to Silverleaf Analytics. Beside it, I pulled up the 90-page compliance document, highlighting the exact paragraph Vance had signed, displayed right next to the cryptographic proof of his digital signature. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice calm, authoritative, and commanding the absolute attention of every billionaire and city official in the room. "Let us clarify the situation. You are not experiencing a system failure. You are experiencing a legally executed revocation of commercial licensing. I am the sole proprietor of Silverleaf Analytics. This core algorithm belongs entirely to me. Your project manager authorized its use, and then he hastily terminated my employment, which triggered an automated security protocol designed to protect my private assets." The chief executive officer looked at the massive screen, then slowly looked at me. "Aspen, what is it going to take to turn the system back on? The city is about to walk out." I looked at him with absolute, unshakable calm. "I have 3 non-negotiable conditions for the immediate reinstatement of your software license." I held up one finger. "First, Vance Sterling is to be terminated right here, right now, for gross negligence and corporate endangerment. He will receive 0 severance pay, and his unvested stock options are entirely forfeit." Vance gasped, trying to push himself up from his chair. "You cannot do that." "Sit down," the lead venture capitalist snapped at him, his voice cracking like a whip. Vance collapsed back into his seat, trembling. I held up a second finger. "Second, Silverleaf Analytics will be compensated for the emergency commercial licensing of this technology. The fee is $2.5 million, wired to my holding account by the close of business today." A few executives flinched, but no one dared to argue. They were staring down the barrel of total corporate bankruptcy. My fee was a spectacular bargain to save their company. I held up a third finger. "Third, I am no longer a junior engineer working in the shadows. Effective immediately, I am the new Chief Technology Officer of AuraGrid Innovations, complete with the accompanying executive salary and equity package. You will draft the contract before anyone leaves this room." The boardroom was terrifyingly silent. The Chief Executive Officer looked at the investors. The lead investor gave a single, definitive nod. "All in favor of terminating Vance Sterling effective immediately," the Chief Executive Officer stated loudly. Every single hand around the heavy mahogany table, except Vance's, shot up into the air. "Passed," the Chief Executive Officer said coldly. "Vance, you are fired. Get out of my building." Vance looked around the room, his face pale, his jaw trembling. He searched for a sympathetic face, but found only pure, unadulterated contempt. He had absolutely no power left. He slowly stood up, grabbed his expensive leather briefcase, and walked toward the glass doors, staring down at his expensive shoes. He was completely destroyed. Once the door clicked shut behind him, sealing his exit, I turned back to my laptop. I typed in a 12-character decryption key and hit enter. The projector screen flashed bright green. The lockdown vanished, and the beautiful, seamless simulation of the Meridian City power grid flared back to life, running at absolute peak efficiency. The city officials slowly sat back down, their anger replaced by sheer awe. The investors let out a massive, collective sigh of relief. I closed my laptop, walked around the table, and sat down in the heavy plush leather chair Vance had occupied just an hour ago. It was the most powerful seat in the room, and it fit me perfectly. I smiled, looking directly at the chief executive officer. Now, I said smoothly, where were we? Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We truly appreciate your time. Where in the world are you tuning in from today? Please let us know in the comments below. If you found today's story satisfying and entertaining, please consider supporting our channel with just $1. You can scan the donation QR code on your screen, or click the donation link in the description or the pinned comment. Your generous support allows us to pay our hardworking team, helping them provide for their families so they can continue creating these amazing revenge stories for you. Have a wonderful day.